It was a cold winter that year. Summer had been okay. I was a single mom with two kids working for tips in tobacco country. I made $1.98 plus tips working as a cocktail waitress. It was said I had pretty legs. I wore a tuxedo top that was nipped at the waist, and short shorts in summer, and long dressy pants with that satin stripe in the winter. Business in Kinston, North Carolina was cyclical. That means it came in cycles. Summers were full of customers at the Holiday Inn where I worked, with crowds all over and money to spend. They came to buy tobacco for Liggett and Myers and R.J. Reynolds, and some even came from across the sea. I knew how to manage my money. Yes, I did. I would make it on those tips. I would stretch them out over the winter. And usually I could make it to when everything calmed down in the winter. It wasn't so cold with fewer customers and everything would be fine. That had gone on for a few years. With this particular cold winter, the place was empty. I mean, you can't make money if there ain't no customers. It got down into the 20s for several days. I lived in a trailer with my two kids. Finally, the heating oil ran out. Now, I called for delivery of oil and learned that they wanted full payment since back then I had no credit. Back then, credit was for the husband, it was not for the wife. Women depended on their husbands, and mine was all the way in Louisiana. I had taken my kids and departed from him. So I rang him on the phone. He was a third year law student. He told me that getting child support between Louisiana and North Carolina was impossible because Louisiana has Napoleonic code and North Carolina has tort law, and that I would need to hire two lawyers. I had no such money. He said, well, I tell you what I'll do. I'll take Bobby, our son, and make it lighter on you. Well, I talked to Bobby, and Bobby said he would like to go home to his dad. He had an accent that they didn't understand in North Carolina, just like, of course, I speak better English than the North Carolinians do. My accent is better. But anyway, the next day, I got the ticket and then I put him on the plane, and I felt like a really bad bomber. But still, the oil was out. I had a little propane in the stove. So I ran the propane, and then the propane ran out. I went to work every night, serving drinks and being nice to the customers. But it didn't matter. I wouldn't make that $100. It got colder in the house. I pick up my little girlfriend, the babysitters, out to bed. I put a coat on, I put in my car, and I would drive home. I bring her inside, and I go into the smallest room in the house, leave her coat on, leave my coat on, get up underneath the covers, and bring all grades of really warm blankets, and we would sleep together. Well, one morning, my little girl got up before I did, and she went up into the bathroom. And then I heard her screech. She says, Mommy, it splashed at me. And I thought, what in the daylights? I got up and walked in there, and I saw that the top of the toilet water, just a real thin spot, it froze over. Okay. I said, if it's gonna be, it's up to me. Something's got to give. So I got it to the babysitters, and I went over to the community college and I asked them what I could learn in 2 years flat that would give me a stable life for my kid. And they said, well, we've got piloting. And I thought, oh, great, flying airplanes. I didn't say this out loud, but I thought, oh, me in the friendly skies, I'll be the pilot, man. I have all grades of people behind me. It'll be wonderful. I said, how much does it cost? They said, well, everything will be free except your flight lessons. And we got a deal on them flight lessons or the flight time you have to do. It's $35 an hour. You need 5,000 hours to get licensed. I said, oh, forget that. What else you got? They said, well, we got drafting. And I thought, oh, great. I would draw pretty pictures. I would do landscapes. I'd do buildings. I'd do bridges. Who would know? That would be fun. I'd draw all day long. I said, how much does that cost? They said, well, it's free, but you'll need to do 3 years because we don't have computer-aided design yet. That software's coming next year. So it'll take you 3 years. I said, forget that. They said, well, we got electronic engineering technology. And I immediately thought, bleh, I got no use for this. I said, how much does it cost? They said, you're a single mom. It'll be free. I said, okay. What does it require? They said, you got to know a lot of math. I said, I ain't great at math. They said, you can take remedial classes in the summer. It starts in September. I said, okay. So that's what I did. I got into those classes, didn't give a flying hoot about electronics, but I learned it. A year and a half later, I was still working at the bar at night, and I was going to school in the day, and I was cruising into home plate when the bar burned down. Well, now I had a choice to make. I could either forget about school and go get a job in, dress shop or something, or I could go and get welfare. I decided, well, I didn't work all my life since I'm like 15. I went to the welfare department and I told them my problem, and they said they could give me welfare. And I said, fine, I'll need it until I graduate in May, and then I won't need it anymore. And they looked at me with this knowing smile of like, yeah, sure, that's what they all say. Well, 5 months later, I was interviewing, and I had talked to Xerox and they wanted to hire me, but that was in Rocky Mount. I talked to Kodak, which was in Buffalo, and I really didn't want that. But then here came CP&L, Carolina Power and Light, and I wanted that bad. I thought the airplanes will stop flying and there'll be strikes with the post office, but I'll be doggone if they ain't going to have the power on the lines. So I perked right up and did my very best job of interviewing. And they said I was a great candidate, but nobody ever quit the power company. So there was no jobs. Okay. Well, I went home and I envisioned every night I would go to bed and I would say, thank you, Lord, for my job at Carolina Power and Light or something better. And I would envision myself driving my little tiny blue Mustang past a sign that said CP&L. Well, that day came when the phone rang and I was down to my last $100 in the bank. See, I had saved and I was supplementing my income with the money I had in the bank. Well, they said, how would you like to be a power plant electrician? I thought, oh, dear Lord, no. But I said, yeah, can't wait. Well, I went over and I interviewed. I had on my blue dress with my pumps, and pumps being shoes for you guys, and looked pretty nice. And there was this 10-story filthy outdoor thing, and it was loud noise. But anyway, I got the job. So I went from making $1.98 an hour to making, I think the yearly was 17,900 or something, 17,009, which was big change. And I would drive over there. And the first day I went there, I walked into the electric shop, and me being a cocktail waitress and friendly, I said, hey, how y'all doing? And all the guys folded their arms and turned around and looked at the wall. And I thought, this is not a good sign. Well, they were hell bent on getting rid of me. They would get out in the plant and they would get me on someplace that was hanging out in outer space with nothing underneath it, the grid of metal, and they would jump on it and the whole thing would shake. They wanted to scare me off. But scaring me off was not going to happen. You see, I would drive to work every day and I would cry halfway there. But about a mile before I hit the front door of the plant, I would dab my eyes and I would say, just for today, I'm gonna make it. And so forthwith I did. I made it through that. And then finally, after I had my 6 months in, I went to my boss and I said, this work is way tough for me. I would like a transfer. I had already passed a basic power plant manual, and I knew after 6 months and proving myself to be reliable that I could damn near slap the CEO in the face and keep my job because I was their freaking minority. My boss looked at me. He says, you got grit. I will help you. He says, there's a job over at the System Meter Lab. It actually pays a little more money than this. I'll recommend you. So I got in my little car and went over to the System Meter Lab thinking, oh, lab, this is going to be filled with brilliant people. They're wearing lab coats and all like that. I didn't get past the front door. I had to sit there and talk to this guy who asked me all kind of questions. And one was about a hysteresis curve, which is a real technical thing. And I happened to know the answer. And so he hired me. I got there on a Monday and come to find out I was the only woman again. Well, now, those guys were a bunch of farm guys. They were playing around in the shop all the time. I walked in the shop room and there was somebody mooning somebody else. And I said, hey, man, whatever y'all want to do works for me. And I hung in there and I learned all kinds of stuff. It wasn't easy, but, after a while they calmed down and realized they had a lady in there. I had 2 toilets and 12 lockers. I could sit on this toilet and then I could sit on that toilet. I was the only lady and I enjoyed myself. But I really was a square peg in a round hole because I'm a talker. Well, end of story. I wound up doing 5 jobs as the first female, and each time it got a little easier. And I tell you, all those times that I rode to the power plant thinking, I'm going to make it this day because my little girl and I, we ain't never sleeping in a coat again. Well, I'll tell you what, my little girl has a master's degree from UNC. She's about to become maybe deputy director of her department. She can shop any freaking where she wants. And the day is not coming when she ever has to sleep in a coat again. Thank you.